Good morning, everybody. Mike, I think we might need your microphone.
Oh, here's yours.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you can hear me. It's a little bit weird here. My name's Dominic. I am the UK marketing manager for Azerion, and I'm joined here by Jasmine from Karl Lagerfeld. So we're hopefully going to talk to you about attention's rising star and what is, next for attention. Attention has been growing massively over the last few years, but we're keen to look beyond that already and understand the creative levers that link attention to brand performance. Multitasking here. So, just very, very quickly, 12 months is a long time in this industry. We were here last year as InSkin, and since then we have been acquired by Azerion, and there's been a multitude of brands that have come under there. Azerion's at the intersection of gaming and digital advertising, so if you want to have any more chats with us, we're down at table 66, and we'd love to chat to you more about that. The insights that we're going to share with you today are predominantly from InSkin, but as part of the new group, we've got a bunch more ads around video and gaming as well, so a lot more to offer. So over the next 15 minutes, we've got a lot to talk about. What do we want to get across? Well, firstly, everyone knows that big formats drive lots of attention. But so do pop-ups, and I guess that's a big issue from our point of view. Attention is important, but what we want to do is, there's a lot more to it than an absolute score, and this arms race to try and drive as much attention to a format isn't necessarily healthy. We want to understand how creative and brand health can actually affect the quality of attention, and how does attention influence brand performance. So with a whistle-stop tour, we're going to look at what creative levers drive attention. We're going to look at the impact of attention on brand performance. And we've also worked with Lumen on a number of projects around the amplification effect of high-impact formats as well. So with regards to the creative levers, we've done over 200 visual engagement studies over the last few years, which we're going to give you some headlines from. And as I mentioned, we've been working very closely with Lumen on a variety of projects. So, by interrogating over 200 visual engagement studies over the last couple of years, we've unearthed a wealth of creative insights that can show the impact of our formats and our creative capabilities that can be useful to the wider industry, not just to the skins world. And by comparing the impact of creative in things like the headers versus the sidebars, whether or not the creative has a video asset in it or a non-video asset, and if it does have a video asset, whether it's a vertical video or horizontal video, we hope to give you a few ideas of how things can progress. So we work with a company called Sticky on this particular study, and thankfully the research we showed for this particular asset was that there were no major surprises. If you think like a user, when you go to a page of content, you're going to scroll down the page, so actually the header disappears fairly quickly, and that actually means that the sidebars deliver a significant amount of attention. But the left-hand side typically delivers more attention than the right-hand side. And when you start using video, video typically gets more attention than non-video creatives. And finally, when you use vertical video, it typically drives more attention than horizontal video. I use the word typically because as you start blending art and science, you do get the anomaly, and some of our best performing creative has been using things like parallax effects, where you get this 3D view or this depth of perception that means that the creative drives a lot more attention. So those are just some really simple headlines. We can obviously chat more about that. But with regards to the brand performance side of things, we looked at 4 campaigns and we've tested 4 creative elements of that. Attention measurement can further our understanding, and we wanted to dig a little deeper about how attention impacted brand performance. So we've also looked at real-world attention measurement, brand performance measurement, and using their lamp tag, Lumen's lamp tag, we've actually looked at how people can actually interact in the real world. And that's something I want to touch about, is this whole kind of concept of the observer effect. And then finally, we're going to have Jasmine come up and talk about some of the creative learnings from some recent studies we've done with the Karl Lagerfeld team as well. So just to give you an idea, these are the 4 studies that we actually ran. The first 3 actually made our creative campaigns of the year finalists last year, and they're kind of the best in class that we think from a creative point of view we've used. They've all been analysed against the same campaign, same piece of content. So again, we're trying to minimise the number of variables within the campaign. And then the final campaign at the bottom, we just use as initially a benchmark. This was Dorchester Hotels. It's a beautiful creative, but it's quite clean, quite simple. It had a lovely animation in the left-hand side, but we wanted to try and give this a comparison to make sure that our big, bold creatives, which have used lots of video assets and lots of really great ideas, kind of shows how we can really perform in the best world. So we ran a study with Lumen a few years back. I'm just going to show you a couple of studies. What was interesting about this particular performance was actually the Dorchester campaign drove the most attention, which we weren't anticipating. As with all these things, if you know the answer before you do the test, it's not worth doing. So we were quite keen to talk about this. And this is really because effectively what happens is the campaigns we were anticipating driving more attention almost underperformed. And this kind of got us thinking. That we were trying to think that high consideration or premium brands drive more attention. But when we actually got these unknown brands with great creative executions, they can actually drive more attention. And our concern was actually how we typically perform when we're actually looking at brand recall, because it's no use just driving attention. High attention is important, but what we want to do is drive an impact. And this is where we actually looked at the performance of the campaigns. And when you look across the 4 campaigns, the Dorchester actually drove the least amount of brand performance in terms of recall. And this is where skins and high impact formats are really, really good. Ferrero Rocher, Brewdog and Karl Lagerfeld drove significantly more attention. And the reason we think this is important is you've got to start considering how your brands perform and not just look at the absolute amount of attention that a campaign gets. And then one thing we thought was quite important was actually how you can actually perform with a skin versus a standard format. And campaigns rarely made up of just one element, i.e. a skin or a video or an MPU. And that is kind of how it leads on to our amplification effects. Now, we did a study a couple of years ago with InSkin that looked at the second exposure and how our high-impact formats can amplify subsequent exposure to cheaper formats. And the whole rationale here is to try and understand how we can make campaigns work more effectively. And the vast majority of people will come up here and tell you about how important the first exposure is. We were quite keen in trying to discover how important our formats had, how much of an attention format, amplification effect rather, our formats had on that second exposure. So in this example, the second MPU has been pre-exposed or primed by a skin, and we compared the performance of that MPU to one that's just been pre-exposed to a standard MPU. And the great news is that with not expending any more money on your media, if you prime your MPUs with high impact formats, they're going to be looked at for longer. Looked at more likely, they're going to be looked at for longer, and more importantly, they're going to have more of an effect because people will actually engage with them more. And so therefore, by combining those effects, you can actually make your campaigns work more effectively. Now, this is just a skin to an MPU. As part of Azerion, we've now got a whole suite of creative products, and one of the tests we're going to be looking at, hopefully in the future with the guys at Lumen, is how we can link attention from skins to gaming to video as well. So that's something that's on the horizon. But to reiterate, we really want to look beyond absolute attention. We need to consider the quality of attention, and it seems to vary on your different perspectives as a brand. Different brand life cycles and different categories of brands garner different attention levels. So let's dig a bit deeper and not just compare to an average format. Now, the good news is that the Lumen shared some creative recommendations and observations for why some campaigns attracted more attention or drove more brand performance. With Ferrero and Brewdog, there was a really strong use of distinctive brand assets that everyone's quite familiar with. And also, you've got to take into consideration that these 2 products are pretty much low impulse brands that you can buy every day. The point we want to make is that with these premium brands, and I'll introduce Jasmine now, they're more considered purchases, and it's not necessarily something that you would buy on a regular basis. And in that regard, you have to leverage your attention far more effectively. So I'm now going to hand over to Jasmine, who can talk in a little bit more detail about the brands.
Can you hear me? Yes? Okay. So I started in a media agency, so I have a media background, and then moved into luxury fashion. And one of the things that was really obvious to me when I did that is the way that we speak about creativity and creative. So when I was at a media agency, it's all about CTAs, formats, specs, metrics, attention. But when you work within the client and within the brand, it's really about creative concepts, visual identities, how the consumer feels, whether the color scheme is right. So when we were sort of called out by Lumen and by Azerion on our skin, it was actually something that was really useful for us as a brand to start talking with our creative team and have a bit of more of a dialogue about creating adverts instead of just creatives. So one of the things that they really called us out on was how simple and blended and minimalist the assets were. So this was our first ever high impact skin. So it's the first one we ever created. How do I make it play?
Should have been there.
Oh, sorry.
Do you want to go to the first one?
Go to the other one. So when we made this one, we were so proud. We were like, nailed it. This is amazing. It's stunning. It's visually impactful. It's going to do so well. It was the first high impact display thing we'd ever created with our creative team. And we really thought we'd completed it to perfection. When we got the results back and when we got the Lumen study back, we really found that it wasn't actually so successful. So it was successful in some senses, but if you saw the previous slide against some of the other brands, it really wasn't up to the standard that we had really hoped for. So then we took the results away, we had conversations with Azerion and we had conversations with our creative team about how do we make these beautiful visual assets into adverts. And this is what led us to our second attempt. So our second attempt, you can really see we had way more prominent CTAs, we had differences in the images throughout the creative. We obviously had Amber Valletta, I think she may have had a bit of an impact too. But this one really helped us elevate our position and elevate our advertising creativity. So one of the things that Lumen did come back with was the difference in color schemes. But we thought it was a bit more than that. So we had further conversations with our creative team in depth, and we decided it was down to a few additional factors. So some of the things that I think are really prominent is that this one is very creative. Our creative team loved this one because it's sleek, it's minimalist, it's clean, there's no logo that's obtrusive, there's only one CTA. But then when we took our learnings away and the learnings from Azerion, we decided to add in bold colors, prominent figures, strong call to action that's always visible, image variations, hotspots, all these things that in a media background are really obvious. But for a creative team, they're really quite new and it's quite hard for them to understand. But what was also so good about this is we were then able to prove to our creative team the difference between the performance of the old, sleek, beautiful creative versus the new one where we had all of these additional advertising elements. And what this allowed us to do, as well as improve performance, was also to demonstrate to our creative team how they can improve the way that they think about content and develop better ads in the future. And I think that's it. And I will now have to go, but I'll be back tomorrow if anyone has anything they want to talk about.
Questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So just to kind of wrap up, I just wanted to talk about a few things. First of all, something to take into consideration is the observer effect. Now, a lot of these tests are done in the lab, and as soon as you ask someone to look at something, even without actually guiding them, you're going to affect people's performance. The lamp tag, which you will probably hear about from Mike today, takes that real-world user behavior, and it applies a predictive model to help develop what happens in the real world in terms of attention. And I guess that's what we were quite keen on doing. So for a couple of the campaigns that we measured, we actually looked at the real world performance as well. And what was really interesting is to see actually in the real world, our formats drove a lot more attention. So this is not to kind of show off. I'm sure this will happen to a lot of high impact skins and those kind of brands. But it's just to take into consideration that that's an important factor. People do behave differently in the real world. And from our point of view, we think that obviously the high impact, the richer formats will probably drive a lot more attention. So something to take into consideration. So in conclusion, we've got a few things we want to talk about. Obviously, consider the observer effect when you're actually testing stuff, but also brands behave differently. Younger, considered purchase brands win more attention with higher impact formats. So again, you know, if you're trying to get that attention factor, that's really important. You can probably get away with lower impact fat campaigns, creatives, if you are a well-known FMCG brand with very distinctive brand assets. But we wouldn't recommend it. And then also more established brands, as I said, will actually drive greater awareness and also get a better quality of attention to drive that subsequent exposure or stronger brand performance. And finally, what we've shown is actually that attention analysis can help drive creative best practice and also performance as well. So it's not just about creating that brand awareness, it's actually doing the entire funnel. And then finally, just to let you know, it's very, very busy here today. So if you have any questions, do come and find us later. Thanks to Jasmine, you can very kindly enter a competition to win one of 2 Karl Lagerfeld handbags. So click away here, come to our desk, have a play. It's a very simple game. We'll be doing the prize draw on Thursday. Thank you very much for your time. Lots of slides I appreciate, but hopefully we'll chat with you guys soon. Mike, over to you.